appreciate you very much coming out, and obviously a great resource for us guys as coaches to have his expertise here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll try to keep this pretty quick. The goal is to just provide you guys with some of my insights as to what I've learned from coaching younger athletes and older athletes, kind of how it's similar. A brief background on myself coaching wise. So I played competitive baseball into college and a little bit in the minor leagues. Had a regular job for about a year. I really didn't like it because I felt like I'd spent the previous 7 or 8 years focusing mostly on baseball at a high level. So got into coaching around here, actually started doing some like lessons and stuff to test it out, but started really coaching like an 8 and 9 year old fall ball league that was very pickup style, show up on a Sunday, play one game, go home. And that was very interesting to me because I had come from very high level part of the game, and this was now just really teaching the basics. And I hadn't played the basics level of baseball since I was a kid, so it was very different. But I think the experiences I had from that helped me a lot with coaching higher level players after that, and kind of moving into, I coached in pro ball with the Brewers for 3 years, and then the business was moving pretty well, so decided to just stay home. My wife didn't really like the fact that I was gone for 7 months of the year, so I can be home and be with her and be at the facility on a daily basis, which is really cool. But yeah, I'm really just passionate about having kids enjoy baseball at a young age. There's some stuff that I'll talk about in here, but like 50% of them don't make it to the big field. And the big field is very intimidating and challenging at first, but once you kind of get comfortable on it, baseball becomes really fun. Baseball in Little League, when you're 12, feels like you're playing in the big leagues. You have the ability to throw the ball all over the field, hit home runs, and all that stuff diminishes quickly when you get on a big field. So just kind of things I'm going to reiterate today are skills that these guys can start working on, or girls, so that when they do have the chance to go to the big field, they're still at least entertaining the idea of playing baseball. Because a lot of these kids aren't going to realize what they can do baseball-wise until after they're done going through puberty, right? So by the time they're like 16 and a half, let's say, that's when they really realize like, oh, I can hit the ball pretty far, or I can run pretty fast, and I can throw the ball pretty well. You'd hate for a kid to give up on that when they're 13 or 14, and a lot of the times it's due to things like fear, or just fear of failure. So I'll jump right into it so I don't go too long. But basically, youth pitching, what's the main goal? I think the main goal for you guys is that pitchers are now going to keep the game moving rather than coaches or parents, right? So getting them comfortable enough to get out there, throw the ball over the plate, and hopefully someone hits it and someone gets an out, and you guys keep the game moving. But it's really about that. It's just having them facilitate the game on their own. I mean, they might not have pitched before in a game, but they've probably played some kind of wiffle ball or stick ball or something in the backyard where they've done this before, or they've seen someone do it, and now it's their first chance to do it. So teaching mechanics for these kids early on is really not going to be the move, because it's going to really start to scare them and make them feel like they have to be inside this specific framework. So each athlete's going to be unique in the way that they learn, so their learning styles are all going to be different, their body types are all going to be different, and the way they communicate and the way they digest information is all going to be different. And then you're going to have some kids that are extremely passionate about the sport, and some kids that might be playing the sport for the first time. So just kind of taking those things into consideration when you're talking to athletes as a group, and then if you're talking with them individually, kind of get on the level they're on, and don't try to make it too complicated if they don't want it to be too complicated. And if they do want it to be complicated, maybe find a good way to challenge them rather than get them focused on doing something a specific way. So a lot of the athletes, whether they're kids at this age or kids in high school, aren't really going to comprehend what you're telling them the way that you would like them to comprehend it. They're going to comprehend it based on their set of understanding of the game or understanding of their body. And from my experience, most of them, especially at this age, if you tell them to have their hands in a certain position, they're really not going to understand what you mean. They might go, yeah, sounds good. But deep down, they're really just getting confused. And so kind of ways that we can get into kind of helping this is essentially creating challenges and kind of constraints and games in practice that will help them develop these skills. So failure should be expected for these kids. I don't think any of the kids should go out there expecting to just have success every single time they pitch. It might happen the first time they go out to try and pitch. It might not happen until the 5th time, but something is going to happen that's going to make them feel negative. And I think the biggest responsibility that you guys have for coaching these guys is just reminding them that it's not really about whether it's a positive or negative outcome. It's about that you're really excited that they took the leap of faith to go try pitching in a game. And if you kind of drive that energy, a lot of the kids on the team are going to take the risk and be willing to take the risk and try it. Versus if they're struggling out there, this is a good example. So in this fall ball league that I coached, a couple of the kids were like, I want to try pitching. And deep down I was like, this probably not going to work well. But like, they really want to try it, they need to go out there and try it. And if it goes really poorly for 15 pitches, you might have to switch the pitcher. And that might make the kid upset. But that's going to be much better than leaving him out there to experience failure over and over and over again. Right? So just dosing that little bit of failure is going to get them skill set to start to overcome it. And that's where I think it's a really good thing to do, like in practice. You can have everyone try pitching so that they get the taste of this anxiety and this pressure before it's on a game with their parents there. Right? So a lot of times when their parents are there, if it's the first time they're trying it, they're going to be more worried about impressing them than just playing the game. Versus if you have these kids play spike ball or dodgeball or ping pong, they're not going to care about impressing their parents. They're just going to be having fun with their friends. So the more comfortable they get with it just being this fun thing that they're trying to do, like wiffle ball or a game they play in the backyard, the easier it's going to be for them to go out there in the game and just be like, all right, having fun, here we go. It might go good, it might go bad. Kind of being there for them when they fail is huge. And so with that said, like, if they do really well, don't necessarily focus so much on the results of doing well. Remind them that they were trying really hard and you're super psyched to see them get the ball back and continuously try to throw strikes. Not necessarily that they struck out 3 or 4 players. Right? That stuff's going to become obvious to them, and it's going to be obvious within their peers. They're going to know who's doing better in the game. They don't necessarily need to be reminded, like, Johnny did really well, he struck out 4 guys today. Because if you just express that Johnny went out there and did his best to throw strikes and challenge the other team and make the game fun, now everyone's going to think like, okay, I want to be like Johnny. Versus they might not believe they can go out there and strike guys out, and that's going to start to make it intimidating for them when they do go out there. So like I said before, 50%, this is just a decent rough stat, but 50% of them aren't going to play baseball when they get to the big field, which is unfortunate because from my perspective, most of them aren't ready to play on that size of field at the age of 13. But if they understand the skills that are going to help them when they get to that size field, they're going to be in a much better place. And so from baseball in general, it's just going to be throwing the ball as hard as their body can throw the ball. Because once they get on a bigger field, they're going to have to make much further throws. So things you can, we'll talk about this in a couple minutes, but things you can drive home in practice is like starting to test that skill set and push them to want to get better at throwing the ball further. Because they're going to need to be able to do that on a bigger field. Same thing with hitting, like you want them to be able to hit the ball as hard as they can for their body type, which like at this age, some kids are going to be much larger and much smaller. But just kind of re-encouraging them to build their motor, because that's going to be what scales with them as they get to the 11 and 12s, but then also 13s and 14s onto bigger fields. So when it comes to pitching, the skill that's going to scale the most is throwing strikes hard. Right now, that doesn't mean that you need to have the radar gun out there and cheering them on to throw as hard as they possibly can. But if they learn to pitch at a very handicapped speed, or they're controlling themselves to a significant margin, that might work at the beginning, but eventually that skill is not going to continue with them. Versus if you challenge them to move their bodies fast and efficiently, they're going to get more confident in what they're doing, and that's going to allow them to continuously kind of grow with the sport as the sport grows with them. So we're going to talk about how we can work on this a lot, and it's not going to be something that you need to be gung-ho on telling them to throw as hard as they can. But it's really just getting them to understand that the more they try to do this, the easier it's going to get for them and the better they're going to get at it. It's much like, I mean, think about things that you guys might do on your own, right? Like if you play golf and you want to lower your handicap. Well, if you look in the data, the further that you can hit the ball, the better chance you have of lowering your handicap, amongst many other things. How would you go about trying to hit the ball further? You'd probably go to the driving range and try to hit the ball further. You might look into things like, how can I swing the club faster and get my body used to swinging the club faster? So maybe I use a club that's a little lighter. Maybe I use a club that's a little heavier and it gets me more efficient with how I'm rotating. So when I go to the regular club, I can rotate it faster. So just think about it kind of through the lens of yourself and something that you might be passionate about. And from my experience, if you take those thought processes and turn them into small games and things in practice, they're going to work for the kids. You don't have to be like super educated in pitching mechanics or how the body moves or any of this stuff. You really just have to gamify what they're doing. They love games, right? Kids thrive, like video games, right? They love video games. Video games are way different now than when I was a kid. Now their video games are very, very competitive and they love that. They thrive on the competitive like settings and environments that you create, and you can just sit at home watching TV and pull out a piece of paper and scheme up how you're going to run a basic competitive drill at practice. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to have specific mechanical checkpoints. It's just getting them to compete. Then when they go into the game, they're used to that competitive feeling as well. So trying to drive that in practice is super key. So constraint drills are greater than verbal cues. So kind of what I talked about at the beginning. You might talk to a group of 10 athletes, 1 or 2 of them might really understand what you're saying, the other 8 are out to lunch and they have no idea what you're saying. So instead you can just take the entire 10 athletes and give them specific drills to do as a group, and the blending of what you're trying to get them to work on is going to go much further into the entire group. So I'm going to take you through a couple drills that we can do, or you guys can do when you play catch. And we'll get to those in a second. So essentially, what are good mechanics, right? So I really like working with kids who haven't had too much pitching instruction by the time they're like, whenever they come to me, I guess, because a lot of times things that they find to be like truths or things they need to do aren't necessarily correct. And so the biggest thing we can get them to do is move efficiently. And then once they move efficiently, get them to move fast, right? And so kind of what is an efficient mover is going to be what we're going to talk about first, which is going to be essentially using those constrained positions or some kind of overload object, and that's going to get them to drive more efficient motor patterns. So when I played youth baseball, we did a lot of stuff where you'd start maybe on 2 knees, flick the ball back and forth, then you back up, stand on 2 feet, throw back and forth. Those are all constrained positions, right? What you're doing is essentially taking away part of the kinetic chain, right? So if they're on the ground on their knees, or they're standing with their feet wide, it's much harder for them to activate range of motion through their knees, which is going to drive arm action skills. So what we'll go through in order of drills, and I can, same thing, I'll share all my like email with you guys and stuff after if you ever want ideas to do at practice. Just shoot me a text or an email and I'll send you back some videos that you guys can implement. But essentially taking them from the most constrained position to then slowly adding more and more freedom is going to get them to move most efficiently, right? If you have a kid just show up to practice and their first throw is like a full step and throw, you're giving them way too much freedom right out of the gate, versus if you give them some guardrails, kind of like bumpers in bowling, right? They can start to move in a specific way, and then you remove the bumpers, and now they're moving that way and they don't even know it, and you're giving them more freedom. That's going to allow them to feel better, throw more strikes, throw more accurately, and honestly just have more confidence with what they're doing. So it's almost think about it as like you're starting with a very simple objective, and there aren't many ways to solve that solution because they're in a constrained position. And then as you back up, you're going to give more freedom, and they have more freedom to solve the solution. But they've started with the kind of groundwork that you want them to start with. So some things you guys could use And so I was very scared to use these with kids when I first started. And I'll just kind of like, you guys can do the little touch pass around if you want. If you don't want to, it's also totally fine by me. But so, a regular baseball weighs 5 ounces. Kids this age probably should use a baseball that weighs like 4.5 ounces and is smaller based on my experience and research. All of the things in here are either 4 ounces, 5 ounces, or 7 ounces, maybe 6 ounces. So a softball is 7 ounces. It's probably too big for most of their hands, but it's really good for a kid who's like middle school or in high school. And then a blitz ball, which is the yellow ball, which they're going to play with in the yard or at recess or wherever, is about 3.5 ounces, and that's going to be the lightest object that's out there. Same with the football. A football is going to be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 ounces. No one's going to blink if their kid picks up a football and just yeets it in the backyard with their buddy. But if you said, like, coach is going to use weighted baseballs today, a lot of people will freak out quick. And that's okay. That was me. Now I'm very comfortable knowing that kids pretty much of any age, 8 or older, could benefit from using the red ball, which is 7 ounces, just like a softball. The yellow is 5 ounces, just like a baseball, and the green one's 4 ounces, which is a little bit lighter than a baseball. You can also get these in baseball form. And the biggest thing is just staying within that tight barrier close to the weight of a baseball, because they're used to a baseball. But by giving them the heavier object, it's going to force their body to find more efficient ways to throw it. Right? So you could have some softballs or some 6-ounce baseballs or some of these red balls and use them for some of those earlier progressions. And you're asking them to do this at a moderate intent, not like a full, let's just go right out of the gate and rip the ball. A lot of times too, when we're using something heavier, I'll have them use like a figure 8 or something to get some momentum going through their body so they feel athletic. But using so just like going from most constraint to freedom, which we'll talk about in a second, the heavier stuff early on is going to really drive them to do things consistently, which, like at the beginning we talked about, we just want them to throw strikes and we want them to facilitate the game. So if they can consistently throw the ball more efficiently where they want to, they're going to throw more strikes, the game's going to keep moving, and it's not going to be so boring. So from my experience, you don't need to be afraid of using something that's slightly heavier or slightly lighter than a baseball. The biggest thing is going to become the dosage at which you use them, right? So if a kid were to just use the heavy ball the whole day and make 100 throws, it's probably going to tire them out quicker. If they use it for 10 to 15 throws and then they go to a baseball, it's actually going to get them more ready to throw a baseball than if they just picked up a baseball and started throwing it. Same thing, how do you create fast movers? So essentially you just want to expose them to faster speeds. One of the easiest ways to do that is either getting their body moving with some kind of momentum. Think like if you're at shortstop and you feel the ball and you shuffle pretty good and get your body moving, you're going to be moving faster than if you just lift your leg and throw a pitch. Same thing if you're in the outfield and you catch a fly ball and then you crow hop and you're going to throw it home. Your body's creating more energy and more momentum. Your arm is naturally just going to move faster. So to get them to move faster, you want to expose them to higher speeds. They'll play blitz ball till they're blue in the face in the backyard. They'll play wall ball at school with a tennis ball or a moon ball or some of these things that are really light, racket ball, and they're going to chuck that thing. So I watch it at the gym. Kids will be out there playing wall ball and they will be throwing a light implement as hard as they possibly can, and they will do it for 25 minutes until I tell them they have to stop because I'm afraid that they're doing it too much. So they're already doing a lot of this stuff. There are now ways for you to just build it into practice so that it aids in what they're trying to get better at. So the moon ball, in my opinion, is probably too light. That thing's very light. But a tennis ball, right, is something you could just probably find in your house. If you want to expose them to moving a little bit faster, you could just have them mix in maybe some outfield throws with the tennis ball. And it doesn't mean 50 reps in a row. It just means maybe they do 1 with the tennis ball, 2 or 3 with the baseball, and then 1 with the tennis ball, 2 or 3 with the baseball. So you're slowly dosing this exposure to faster speeds. And that can be a really good way to help them start to move faster, because as we talked about, the skills that are going to scale are going to be throwing strikes, but throwing them hard. And whether any kid wants to admit it to you or not, they all want to throw harder than their buddies. And so you can help them kind of do this in a safe manner. So creating better movers is not going to happen overnight. So don't expect them to just like do drills one day and the next day throw completely different. But if the season is 2 months long and they do these drills 2 or 3 days a week, by the end of the season they're going to have better throwing skills than they had at the beginning. And that's really all your expectations should be. It might be a light bulb moment for a couple kids, or it might lead them to having more confidence, and now pitching for them is something they love to do, and now they love baseball. One of the coaches I used to work with a lot said this: think about them like seeds, right? You're going to plant the seeds, you're going to water them consistently, you don't want to overwater them, you don't want to overexpose them to sunlight, but then just be patient and they're going to grow. And as they start to grow, that's when you can add more, and that's when you can get into a little bit more detail. But really just kind of letting them go do their thing and trying to stay quiet while they are doing their thing, and just trust that some of the stuff that you can do in practice is going to set them up to succeed in the game. Don't try to coach them necessarily while the game is going on. Just kind of let the game go on, and if it goes poorly or it goes great, it's going to happen. That's baseball, and that's sports and life in general. So just kind of giving them patience in the game and not expecting them to do too much. And that's kind of where I put this up here. Is like, it's probably my favorite thing to hear at any game ever, but throwing strikes is very hard. Whether you're a kid, an adult, whoever, and no one's taking the mound to try to pitch in a game and not trying to throw strikes. So try to remind their teammates, remind parents, whoever, that's something that you don't need to yell during the game. If the kid's out there with the ball, they're trying to throw it to the catcher, which is going to be a strike. They're not trying to throw balls. They're not thinking about something else. They're going to be really scared, intimidated, anxious, all of these things that are all good things for them to experience, but just don't reiterate it. So gamify practice. Competition and practice is going to be your best ally. And then just providing freedom for them to self-discover and try things, and let them know that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try something that you think might make you better, and then you really realize it doesn't, versus feeling like they have to do something in a strict, perfect way all the time. I think this is probably the thing that I've realized as a coach is most powerful, is like, if you get them to understand what they're trying to accomplish and then you let them try to do it, they're, like I talked about at the beginning, they're all unique individuals. They're going to all find different ways to do it. And just because it worked for one guy doesn't mean it's going to work for the other guy. But they're going to start to watch other kids and kind of try things that other kids might be doing. And you don't even need to kind of bring that up or tell them. So this is going to be the most mechanical I'll get with this stuff, and I think this is the same thing, the most mechanical you guys should get with them. So an ideal throw is going to start with some kind of momentum. So think about playing shortstop and they shuffle to first base. If they're playing the outfield, they're going to crow hop. That's all momentum. Pitchers, same thing. When they go to pitch, they should start to create some momentum to home plate. That momentum, it depends if the mound is big or not, but even on a flat mound in Little League, if their body weight starts to move towards home plate, now they're using gravity to help them produce this energy rather than trying to push to create this energy. You want the momentum to be kind of natural and from gravity. That's going to allow them to move freer. So get them doing things that creates momentum in practice that's not necessarily pitching. The next thing you're going to do is your lead leg, so your front leg, is going to brace that energy that you just created. So the momentum that's moving is now going to be stopped by your front leg, and then you're going to transfer that energy up the chain into your arms. Something I never understood as a kid was what my front leg was supposed to do. I used to think that I was supposed to reach really far and let my leg bend. That's going to be way more stressful on their arm than if their leg gets into the ground and stops them. So if their leg gets into the ground and stops them, most of the energy is going to go through their spine, right? And if their energy is going through their spine, they're going to use big muscles and they're going to use their body the right way to decelerate after the ball comes out of their hand. If their front leg doesn't brace and keeps moving, they're going to decelerate mostly through their arm, and their arm's going to start to get fatigued really quickly. So things you can do for that as well is like put down a pool noodle on the ground, have them shuffle, throw, and stop before the pool noodle. You could do this with a bunch of different things, but it's just creating constraints that force them to practice this skill without you just telling them that they have to do it. And that's where you can be creative as much as you want. I like to tell kids all the time that it's very similar to hitting. Right? In hitting, if they try to do this, it's going to be way harder to make consistent contact. When they hit, they do a lot of these things really well. Right? When they hit, they're going to get momentum, they're going to brace with their front leg, and then they're going to transfer energy. They just have a bat which is heavier, which allows it to happen a little bit better because it's an overload implement compared to a baseball. So the bat's helping them in a sense from that perspective. But really just making it that simple and trying to find things that you can do in practice to make these things become better skills. So some things you can avoid trying to say because they're probably going to happen anyway, and they happen naturally without having to tell them. Right? So like I said at the beginning, the whole push off the mound thing, that's actually probably not going to help them as much as if they just kind of let their body start to fall. Right? The reason being is because if they push, their hips aren't going to really rotate, and that's when they're going to decelerate through their arm. Versus if they start to get momentum and brace, their hips are going to rotate and they're going to throw the ball, and the energy is going to come through the back of their body, which is going to be way less stressful on their arm. Reach. This one I wasn't sure if I should put on there, because some kids do really short arm the ball. If they do short arm the ball, you can kind of tell them they should try to reach towards their target. But in reality, if they're creating momentum and rotating fast, their arm is going to go out here, and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. They don't think about these things when they play wall ball, but if you watch them throw, when they play wall ball, they're going to throw the ball. Probably the best that you've ever seen. And then pronate, which is just their thumb's going to come down. A lot of kids, for some reason, they come to me, are like, I have to pronate. It's like, I don't care what you throw, your arm's going to pronate. It has to happen. It's a natural deceleration pattern. And so trying to think about it is just going to make something else get messed up. And that's why a lot of this stuff where we're talking about like internal stuff, whether it's like where their body is or something they're trying to do, the more internal they get, the more it's going to mess up other things in the sequence. If you get them to think external, like throw it really hard at the clock on the wall, they're not going to think about how their body's moving. Their body's going to move in the most organized, coordinated fashion that it can for them. So getting them to think about external targets and goals rather than internal thoughts or things like that is going to be very beneficial. So 4 drills that you guys can do at the beginning when they're playing catch. So the first one's called a pivot pick-off. Essentially just take their dominant side, so if they're a righty, they're going to put their right leg in front of their body. This is going to teach them to counter-rotate and throw with their hips facing the target, which is eventually what you want. And you can have them start in this. The least constrained position would just be a normal set position where they would throw from. Most constrained would be kind of starting with their arm somewhere up at a 90 degree. So we want them eventually to get their arm up at a 90 degree when their foot hits the ground. That's going to give them the most efficient way to accelerate into ball release. It's going to allow them to throw the best. So if you have them start there, you're creating those bumpers, and now they have to do that. And I can send you videos of all these drills as we go through them. A roll-in is essentially going to be very similar, but now we're going to walk into it, and instead of having our right leg in front, we're going to land with our left leg in front, just like a normal throw. But this one's really nice to start in constrained position as well. And then after that, the best way to do it would be through a figure 8, because now you're creating some rhythm, and they're starting to figure out their body a little bit. So constrained position would be here. It would just be right, left, throw. Kind of like a modified javelin throw, but with the baseball. And then with the figure 8 would be similar, where you figure 8 into it. And now they're starting to take some of that energy and capture it and transfer it through rotation, which is really good. Then you can go to step back. Step back's going to be similar to a lot of throws they might make on the field. They're going to load into their backside and then come forward. So now you're teaching them kind of how to load the energy into the back of their drive leg. Right, so think the back side of their leg, that's where you want them to load energy into. A good way to teach a kid too, who has no idea what that might feel like, is take one of the buckets you guys have for practice and have balls in it. If the lid's on it, have the kids start sitting on the bucket and their left foot off the ground, and then just tell them to step and throw. They're going to realize how much energy is loaded in the back of that leg, and they're going to realize like, oh, I don't push, I just kind of start myself to rotate. But step back is a very athletic drill. And you can have them do that when they're getting further and further apart, rather than just step and throw. They're absorbing or capturing energy and then transferring that energy. And then walking wind-up. Walking wind-up is probably the best pitching drill that all these kids could do. I would highly recommend having them do this in practice, because it's going to create some overspeed. It's going to create very athletic positions and moves for them. But essentially, if this is the rubber and I'm going to pitch towards home plate, they're going to start a good step or so away from the rubber, and they're going to step up onto it and go. So now they're getting momentum. They're also not being asked to have a specific way to do pitching or a specific thing to get to. Right? Some kids might go, oh, balance point, and go. That might just be how they comprehend what they're trying to do. Some kids might just blow right through it and rip the ball really well too. Neither one of those is better than the other. It's more about how the kid solves the problem. And if the kid's throwing strikes and throwing well, however he's doing it is probably the best way for him to do it based on his anatomy and his understanding of what he's trying to do. So just don't feel like they don't have to get to a balance point. They don't have to extend their arms. They don't have to follow through a certain way. All of those things might limit what they're actually trying to figure out how to do. So just kind of take the reins off on those things and just get them to be more athletic through some of these progressions, and they're going to start to really figure out how their body moves best. So long toss and high intent throws are also great ways to help them develop, and a very fun way to do so. So I would say once a week is probably plenty to test this, depending on their game schedule and stuff like that. But you could have them play catch as far as they can with their partner. Just manage the dose. So don't let them do that for 30 throws. Have them get back pretty far and then back up 5 feet every throw until they can't back up any further. And then high intent throws could just be like, 3 or 4 throws with a tennis ball each from the outfield to home plate, and then give them baseballs and have them do a couple more. And that way you're exposing them to overspeed. Little Jeter quote: can't let your failures define you, you have to let your failures teach you. So from my experience with younger kids especially, let them want to be coached by you before you start telling them some things they can do that are going to help. They might not be interested in your feedback until they realize, like, shit, what I'm doing isn't working. I need to figure out a way to maybe do this a little bit better. Now they're going to be all ears to what you have to say, and that's really like you might only get this moment with a couple kids once or twice during the season, but being ready to give them the feedback they need in that moment in time is going to be the best thing that you can do, rather than you don't need to give it to them until they really are ready to receive it, which is usually going to be after something negative that happens. And I would say kind of wait a day or two to address it, because they're just going to be emotional in the moment, but the next couple of days they're thinking about this and reminding themselves what it felt like. They're going to be really open to kind of something new. Really good drill you guys can do. I did this in pro ball all the time with guys, and it was probably the best thing that we could have done with them. Just have kids go to shortstop, hit them ground balls, lefty, righty, outfielder, catcher, it doesn't matter, and have them field the ground ball and try to throw it to first base with some kind of command-based competition. Right? So it doesn't necessarily matter if they field it correctly, because this would be a throwing-based skill we're trying to improve. What matters is if they throw it to, maybe it's a coach, and the coach has to be able to stay on the bag to catch the ball. Maybe it's a screen, and the ball has to hit a screen, whatever it might be. But they're going to compete with their buddies, and it's going to make them way better at throwing more accurately than trying to make them do that when they're just playing catch, let's say. It creates a lot of freedom, allows them to try new things, right? So if they go this way and field the ball, and they throw sidearm, that's okay. They're trying new things. They might realize it works for them. They might realize it doesn't. Same thing, outfield throws from center field to home plate. If you just hit them with some basic pop flies or just toss the ball up, you can put a screen at home plate and tell them that they need to hit the screen, whether it bounces or hits it in the air, whatever it might be. Now you're drawing a target in from a pretty far distance, and that's going to help them quite a bit as well. And then that's something they're going to do in the game, whether they're pitching or playing a different position, and you're just improving the throwing skill. So it's baseball. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes it rains. I think the biggest thing too that I've learned since coaching high school baseball, I don't think is much different, honestly, from an emotional standpoint than some of the kids you guys are coaching, is just trying to stay even keel with them. Right, so like if they do really well, I try not to get super jacked up, because the next minute it's going to go way south, and then I'm going to be going from jacked up to maybe upset with them, or jacked up to, oh, now we're down by 5 runs. How's my body language look? Like, the more even keel you stay, the better they're going to do, the more resilient they're going to handle the situations that are tough, And also they're not going to get super high when it's something that's going really well, because in baseball it just doesn't always go well. Eventually they're going to run into a brick wall and something's going to not be fun. And they need to know that you're there to kind of talk them through it or just accept it. It doesn't have to be something that you get into too much, but just trying to make sure that you're kind of holding consistent energy the whole time is really important. So MLB Pitch Smart is something that is now pretty recent, and they do a pretty good job of kind of explaining the thresholds of like how often kids should pitch based on their age. This is something that I couldn't hammer home more, and the fact that I had to miss part of my youth baseball when I was playing because I would pitch a game, catch a game, play shortstop, pitch, catch, play shortstop. And by the time I was like 12 years old, went to play All-Stars, I couldn't play on the All-Star team because I had tendonitis, which was not anything major, not going to like ruin my baseball career, but I hated showing up to baseball and not being able to participate. And that was probably just because I was allowed to participate too much in too short of a period of time. These kids might be pissed at you if you tell them you can't pitch today, but they're going to forget it within 20 minutes as soon as they leave. And so just kind of being the most responsible you can be around this stuff is huge. This is just the parameters they set. I would 100% agree with this. Like, no kid needs to throw probably more than 50 pitches at this age. They're not really playing in any games that matter. They're not going to play in any baseball games that matter until they're in high school, in my opinion, anyway. That's when it's them against their peers and they're really trying to prove themselves and represent their school. And even kids on our high school team, I won't really let throw more than that, because the last thing I want them to do is injure themselves. And honestly, performance after a certain number of pitches really diminishes unless it's something they do year-round, not year-round, but unless it's something they're really prepared to handle. And then the days of rest is really, really important. Ideally, your guys' game schedule lines up where you're not playing, 5 days in a row. But the next page is why I think the pitch count and rest days is really important, because these two are the most important things to be aware of. So 45% of youth athletes that are injured pitched in a league without pitch counts or limits, and then 43 pitched on consecutive days. So I played professional baseball, and pitching on consecutive days is not fun. You might have the adrenaline and the energy to get it done, but it's going to create a negative toll on your body over time, and that's the last thing you want. And then multiple games in the same day. I did that in college once, thought it was cool. My buddies were coming to a doubleheader. I told the coach I was good to pitch, and I couldn't throw right for like a week after that. I just had to keep it to myself, but like, you guys can control all of these things, and at the end of the day, they're just kids, and we want them to play baseball as they get older. And something like arm pain or discomfort could be the easiest way to make them want to switch to lacrosse or a different sport in the spring. So managing that stuff, and then just make it fun. Baseball teaches us all how to deal with failure, so just don't toss gasoline on the fire, right? It's already hard enough for them. It's really cool that you guys have as many numbers as you have. So do your best to make sure when stuff's going really poorly, don't make it worse. And I think that's the name of the game. It's just getting them to have fun and tell them that you enjoy watching them compete, because that's really what it's about. And then some really good educational resources. So Devin Morgan is a very good resource on Twitter, or X, as it's called now. You get used to that. But I would highly recommend checking out his stuff. He's been on a bunch of different podcasts. If you just Google his name, you'll find some really entertaining stuff that will make practice plans creative. He has some stuff that's free. There's some stuff you can pay for. But there's some really fun ways to gamify practice, and I have some of these things. So if you guys ever want to reach out to me too, I have cards that I'll leave so you guys can get my phone number and email and stuff like that. There's a Driveline Baseball Youth Coaches Certification. It's $150. It's like 10 videos and 10 quizzes. It's super fun and easy to work through, but it's very educational. And like I said before, he's the one who created it, so a lot of the gamified fun practice plans are all going to come right through that. MLB Pitch Smart, their website, has a bunch of really good stuff on it. So things you can share with parents, right? Or if someone's asking like, why my kid didn't pitch today, my kid's the best pitcher, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can just direct them to some objective data, and they'll have to swallow that on their own. It doesn't have to be you being the bad guy. Like I wrote at the bottom here, I'm really passionate about the younger kids especially, because the joy they get from playing is super, super cool. It makes me feel like a young kid again. And I think that's the end of the day, what I'm trying to do, whether it's help them progress level to level through baseball, or just have fun with the basic skills so they can participate with their friends. So that's really all it's about. But thank you guys for the time. I know it was a while, but like I said, I'll have cards. I'll leave those with you guys before I hit the road. And if you have any questions, just shoot me an email or text. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Thank you.
Awesome, Carson. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have any questions for him?